Hi, everybody. This is Addison Shonland, and today I have Ernie Arvai from AirInsight, Brian Foley, and Richard Aboulafia is the black box on the right-hand corner, bottom corner. But joining us all the same to talk about the review of 2021, which I think universally everybody is happy to see the end of, and then sort of a little bit more trepidation looking at 2022. I guess I'm going to just start. I'll start with Richard, just for fun. Richard, looking back over this last year, what is your takeaway for the aviation business?
Well, I guess there were everything that you might conclude from the year was, of course, overshadowed by the ghastly horror of the worst commercial aviation downturn in history. There's no disguising it. As you know, we've never seen a crisis like this before in terms of sheer demand drop and in terms of sheer deliveries drops and whatever else. Nothing like it. However, I think there were a couple of silver linings that also stood out. For one, it was an incredible year for military markets, both at export and abroad. That was maybe because governments regarded defense spending as a form of shovel-ready relief programs for aerospace industries, and partly because of, well, just the continued, human malice and fear and whatever else that drives, a need for defense products. Some of it perfectly legitimate. Unfortunately, there's a great deal of fear out there in the world, probably for the right reasons. Another aspect of this industry this year regarding this industry I thought was fascinating was the resurgence of business aviation. It was such a fast recovery, and in some metrics that I'm sure we'll discuss later, it exceeded peak years in the past, and that's fantastic. And then finally, another thing I would call attention to is the emergence of K-shaped patterns everywhere. You had, basically not just a massive gap between, say, scheduled air transport and private air transport, but a massive gap between domestic and international air service, a massive gap in direction between single aisle and twin aisle demand, a massive gap between Airbus and Boeing, I think, in a lot of ways, in terms of production plans. Economists talk about the K-shaped patterns that have emerged all over the economy, with one line going down and one line going up. And you really saw this all over aerospace and aviation.
Yeah, it was a yo-yo. Brian, the comment around business aviation, obviously that's your space. What would you add to that, looking back?
Before jumping into that, I have to share with you a story. I've traveled a couple times, since COVID, and what I've found interesting is now that the MAX is back in service, while I'm sitting in my seat getting organized, I pulled out the emergency pamphlet, and it's interesting. Neither of the two different airlines I went to labeled the emergency pamphlet the 737 MAX. It was simply 737. So it's interesting to see how the airlines are pivoting a little bit and doing their own remarketing, so they don't, scare passengers out of their seats. That probably isn't justified, but it's interesting how they're handling that coming back. But to the point of business aviation, yeah, it's been a real interesting ride so far. Just like everyone else in aviation, the industry essentially stopped, at least temporarily, while factory lines were closed and buyers, thought twice, about placing orders, and it didn't look good for a while. In fact, the whole industry hasn't been that great for the last decade. It's been flatlined at about 700 unit deliveries per year and not really moving anywhere. We got kicked in the gut by COVID in 2020, and deliveries dropped some 20% below the pathetic 700 a year level. But then suddenly, and as we get into the last half of 2021, all things changed, and it's probably the most optimistic forecast I've done for that sector right now. No one really predicted how the effect of COVID really helped that segment. And we see, the supply of pre-owned jets going down to 3 to 4% of the total fleet, whereas in normal times it's 12%. All of the manufacturers during their quarterly reports are reporting book-to-bill ratios of 2 to 1, which means for every airplane they deliver, they're taking 2 more orders. So their order books are getting fat. The charter companies and fractional companies are all going gangbusters. They're setting new records with regards to utilization, how often they're flying. Some of the providers actually had to stop sales of their jet cards, which is a kind of a prepaid charter debit card, just to provide a good level of service to their existing customers. They couldn't spread themselves too thin, so they actually had to stop sales. Things were so good. Regarding fractional, NetJets just put in another order for 100 Embraer jets, so that'll help the industry. So it's sort of a tale of 2 markets right now. We see the airlines still, roughly, I think the last I saw, 30% below normal, whereas the business jets are utilization are well past 2019 pre-pandemic and are setting records, at least for November during the Thanksgiving time, and at rates of utilization that haven't been seen since the 2007 2008 timeframe. So it's a good time in the industry, and I'm very bullish on the way it's headed. And it's really been a bit of a Cinderella story from going from the depths of half the deliveries of what they were in 07 for the last 10 years to some numbers that are looking good for the future.
So the Phoenix is rising in biz av. Ernie, what is your take looking back?
I think looking back, there's several things that stick out. I think number one was uncertainty and fear resulting from the global pandemic when things fell apart. And uncertainty leads to some strange decisions at times and a reshuffling of the players. I think if I had to assess from a commercial standpoint, it was really the self-destruction of Boeing that stands out as in my mind, with both the MAX and the 787 problems, continuing problems on the 777X development, and even the KC-46 tanker. So the depths of Boeing's troubles are finally being exposed from a company that likes to keep things quiet and tight. And on the business aviation side, I think we're seeing a real resurgence of Dassault and some new competition at the top. The G700, the Falcon 10X joining the Global 7500. We're seeing 3 relatively new airplanes at the top of the market, which are going to drive some sales, as new models always do in business aviation. So I think we're going to see some interesting things happening in terms of both market positioning and market share. So those 2 are my big takeaways from 2021.
I'm glad I only have to speak last because the wise people have spoken. For me, the fascinating thing was to see that Boeing really needed the E2 this year. It would have been a very helpful tool for them to have. And we see that Airbus has been able to do extremely well whenever they could combine a 220 with a 321 and make that a very strong proposition for any customer. And we've seen that the 321 is now amazingly popular. The 220 is amazingly popular. So it's really interesting to see how that's changed. Another thing that, today's news about all these hundreds of flights in the US being canceled because the airlines are saying they're short-staffed because of COVID. Well, one second. If there's any industry in the world that understands depth of staffing and resources, it should be the airlines. They understand the exogenous shocks, how that interferes with their business. And they have just, in the US certainly, they're not recovering quick enough in terms of staffing. and resources. It's amazing to me that these companies need to generate revenue. And so you would imagine they want to put as many seats as they can, put butts in seats as much as they can, and then this happens. It's very strange.
Well, they are putting butts in seats to the point of 90% load factors these days, and still not making it, given the reductions in yields they've had to take and absorbing the loss of international traffic, where they're still flying flights that are relatively empty overseas. That's not coming back anytime soon, given the variance and the rigmarole and testing and all the other crap that you have to go through to fly internationally these days, as you well know. So it's a difficult process for the airlines, especially with governmental support falling away.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act too, because the airlines are very busy now during the holidays. You know, in the U.S., that Thanksgiving, and worldwide, the Christmas holidays. So they're definitely operating at peak right now. But as soon as January comes along, a lot of that demand will fall off, and you probably don't need the headcount you have now. But where it's coming to bite them today, and there's a couple news releases out there, but both Delta and United announced that they're cutting flights. I believe United lost 700 flights yesterday, canceled, because of the CDC recommendation that if an employee gets sick, they have to be out for 10 days. So as you may have seen, the airlines are now lobbying the CDC. I don't know how you change science, but they're lobbying the CDC to make it just 5 days they have to quarantine instead of 10. So that's magical.
I think
it's interesting. The whole macro issue, I think, behind this problem is that we're not used to being in this position as an industry. Typically, aviation is a sort of leading edge recovery agent. The economy, everything comes back. We're right at the front of that. This is the only time I can remember, and perhaps ever, where we're the laggard. Every other sector of the economy is going gangbusters. Manufacturing, restaurants, whatever. Obviously, Omicron might threaten that, but everyone's trying to hire people. We are the last to be hiring people. We're the last to be placing orders for materials. We're the last to be placing orders for everything. And that, of course, means we get the worst pricing and the worst conditions. And, frankly, it's harder to get people back unless you pay them significant bonuses, because the labor market's gotten pretty tight. And I can't help but wonder if that's also what's going on in the background as we as an industry struggle to recover. Well, everyone else kind of got to a position of ordering things and hiring people first.
That's certainly a possibility, Richard. And I think the case here is that the combined effects of basically lack of balance sheets and having to borrow money to keep in operation with a tight labor market have really put a crimp on things for the airlines. They're fiscally unable to provide those kind of pay increases and wage increases to people who are in a position that could be called a risky job. You're out there, particularly the flight attendants. If there's exposure, they're going to be the ones who are exposed, and that's it's not easy to get people to take hazard pay. Without hazard pay, get them to take these jobs.
That's right. And I would also add to that, we've been living in a deflationary environment with shrinking yields, shrinking aircraft prices, especially in real terms. Our playbook is cut costs, cut costs, cut costs, because you have to. And all of a sudden, it's an inflationary environment. I don't think it's a terribly bad one. It's wonderful for workers and the middle classes, but we're not used to it. And, you have this sort of, this is also one of those things that I think has impacted Boeing for years. What do? You crush unions. That's your playbook. And all of a sudden, no, you actually have to think in terms of attracting talent. And I think it's true for everybody in the industry now. It's a completely different mindset.
It is, and the industry hasn't adapted quickly enough.
It's interesting that there's this bifurcation, as you were saying, Richard, at the start of your chat there, about some lines are going straight up and some lines are going straight down, sort of thing. There's just
That's
a
right.
bifurcation across the board here.
And the recovery seems to be now W-shaped instead of V-shaped, with ups and downs and uncertainty that just adds to the confusion. Which how do you plan for the future if it's a W and suddenly it starts going down again, just as you're staffing up? That I think people are being cautious as well.
That's right. As a matter of fact, Ernie, it's sort of like a WWWW. I remember back in March or April 2020, we were all comparing notes on what the shape of the recovery would be like. Is it going to be a U, V, L, Nike swoosh? What does this thing look like? No one, to the best of my knowledge, maybe someone did. Brian, maybe you did. I'll give you credit.
I don't think so.
Somebody must have said, "Hey guys, it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to have lots of little crinkles in it, like a W that keeps going."
But someone kind of brought up a good point. All these, in the U.S. at least, government programs like PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. The airlines had a nice dose of that in 2020, a nice, follow up in 2021. Next year, they're not going to have that. And we could see some, chinks in the armor going forward for airlines that aren't able to stand on their own yet. So we could hear some groveling from the airlines looking for, more handouts in the near term.
Should we take a look forward then? That's actually a good segue. Not want to overburden everybody here when they all want to go on holiday. So, okay, we'll do a round robin again. Richard, looking forward.
Well, there could be better times to ask that question, right? I mean, it's a grim past week. If we'd had this conversation 10 days ago or whatever, I think I'd be pretty optimistic. But this Omicron thing, it looks like it's just racing through the population. From what I hear from experts, and who the hell knows, right? But from what I hear, this is going to burn itself out over the next couple of months. I think it'll be remembered as being maybe a little worse than Delta, but Delta is kind of in the rearview mirror now. We don't know about any further variants. That's obviously a major risk factor. Exactly. But if we get through this, and it's going to be, again, I think, kind of an unpleasant January, then I still think we're a lot of the way there by the end of the year in terms of air traffic. And I think you'll continue to see what Ernie said, and I would apply bifurcation to just a massive divergence of fortunes between Airbus and Boeing. Airbus is upward and upward. Boeing, I have no idea what's going on, and it's the absence of leadership is just kind of bizarre. So I guess those are the things I would watch for. I'd watch for continued growth in the military markets. Business jet's going to be really fascinating. I tend to share Brian's optimism, but obviously there's the stickiness factor. To what extent are the people experimenting with business aviation as a form of transport going to stick around if the pandemic begins to ameliorate? That's going to be fascinating to watch. But there, I'm optimistic.
It's interesting. Just a quick data point. Yesterday, the TSA had, for the first time, I think this year, a higher number than they had from the year before of traffic.
Huh.
So that was we hit the green, so to speak, for the first time this year. Brian, what's your crystal ball say?
Well, for the business aviation sector, at least, we've got the momentum going now, and I don't think the rest of the industry has really realized how good things are yet. The other forecasts out there are still kind of conservative, and I think a lot of the people are just stuck in this mode. Hey, we've had 700 deliveries a year for 13 years now, so next year will be 700 again. But I can tell you, this year will be 700, but only because 2020 was so low, and so we've recovered to there. I can make the argument that by 2024, 2025, we'll be up to the 900 mark, which hasn't been seen since we haven't been at those levels since the 07, 08 timeframe, anything near that high. And it's just a combination of supply and demand. I think the manufacturers are a little gun shy right now. They've been burned in the past of turning up production, and when things go negative, they're stuck with a bunch of whitetails. So they don't want to be in that position again. They're playing the game right now of trying to make keep some price leverage and make the discounts less so they're more profitable. But eventually they're going to turn up the spigot, and it'll take a little time for that supply chain issues to work themselves out and things get going again. But I believe with the new products, like the 6X with Falcon, the 10X, and the 3 products from Gulfstream, that'll help throw gasoline on the sales demand story, and we could in my mind be back to 900 where we haven't been for many years, by probably dangerously close in 2024, 2025 for sure. But yeah, folks haven't really seen the light yet, but I think in the coming months, during each quarterly report, we'll just hear better and better things from the manufacturers, and things will take off from there. One thing that was interesting, I forgot to mention before, but there was a lot of question back in the summertime. What the business aviation was being floated, in charter by mostly the leisure crowd, and there was a lot of question. Hey, what happens after September when business comes back and conventions are still canceled? People aren't working in the office; they don't have to travel. But instead, the flight demand kept very high, and people kept flying, which I think revealed a dirty little secret that maybe all along business aviation has in fact been principally a leisure form of transportation under the guise of business, because it hasn't dented a bit since summer has ended. So again, another reason to be optimistic, because the industry is not hung 100% on business travel.
Ernie.
I think let's go to business travel. I'll second what Brian had. I think the recovery in business aviation is real, and it will be coming in over the next few years. One of the reasons for that is just the general distribution of wealth, and the let's face it, after the crisis, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, and the rich are the ones who are able to fly business jets. And as Brian was stating, the difference between leisure and business at that level, it's a bit of both. It's just a way to travel, and all of the special purpose corporations that are used to house business aircraft and shield liabilities and hide where the money's coming from is part of the game. So we know that business aviation is a tool of the wealthy, and the wealthy got richer, and that's a good sign for the business jet market. Period. I think the competition is going to get a little harder with Dassault coming back into the market with 2 new products, the 6X and the 10X. So I think we're going to see some interesting changes there, particularly with the wider cabins, that may force competitive reactions down the road. So I think we'll see some new products coming out over the next couple of years in this market to challenge those. It's a game of leapfrog, and Dassault and Gulfstream have just made their leaps, and we'll see what happens. Back to the commercial side, I think if I had to predict 2022, I would say this is the year for Airbus. We've seen some of that come already. As Addison, you mentioned, the combination of the A220 and A321 hitting Boeing exactly where it doesn't have any competitive offerings. After the Embraer merger failure, they have no E195 to go against the 220. And the higher versions of the larger versions of the MAX, which the 10 is not out there yet, still won't compete effectively against the A321 Neos. So I think they're going to take advantage of that market advantage, and where they have that competitive advantage against Boeing, and really press it. And I'll go one step further. The A220 is a very popular airplane for Airbus, but it's still a little bit higher cost than they'd like to have. And so I think we're going to see the A220-500 get introduced. We know there are a couple of carriers who are asking for that airplane from Airbus. And that will be the excuse for Airbus to revisit the supply chain and say, hey, we're going to have larger volume. It's time to cut costs. We'll renegotiate some of those contracts and make the A220 as profitable as they as some of the other products in their line. So I think this gives Airbus a chance to really hone its performance and gain in terms of both market share and financial profitability over the next couple of years. Boeing has imploded. The MAX crisis exposed its fundamental lack of talent. I think over the years, the cost cutting has gone from fat to muscle, and they don't have the talent they need to really complete the programs. The 787 disaster in quality control is reflective of that. And they've currently got 95 airplanes on the ground, 12 in work in process. They're and probably looking to the second quarter late second quarter before we can get these airplanes starting to be delivered again. So you're talking, billions of dollars of airplanes sitting in inventory, not doing anything right now, with whitetails waiting to be delivered, and of course airlines demanding penalties for that as well. It's a tough situation for Boeing right now, and we haven't seen the leadership from Dave Calhoun that we need. I've seen this pattern before. Back in the mid 1980s, when I was at ADL, we did a strategy job for McDonnell Douglas, and I wrote a memo that got me in trouble because and it went up to Sandy McDonnell in terms of trouble. Where I predicted that McDonnell Douglas would be out of the commercial airplane business by the year 2000. Well, they didn't quite make it that far. They made it to 1997 before they had to merge with Boeing. But I'm tempted to say the same thing for Boeing and put a 2040 date on it. That Boeing, unless they change dramatically, will be out of the airplane business in 2040 on the commercial side. So there's my future outlook there.
I was just asking for 2022, not 2040.
Looking at a big picture, and I think we'll see emergence of other players in the market, and some alliances that may be necessary. We look at the Boeing Embraer merger. Would have been a perfect product fit to compete against Airbus, but that deal fell apart. So we've got Embraer trying to sell the 195, which is a nice airplane. It's a very efficient airplane. It's probably equivalent in terms of seat mile costs to the A220. It's got the same GTF engines. It's very efficient. It's a good airplane. It's been out there. They've got a great support network, service. They've got reliability, all of the things that you'd want on that airplane. But what do they bundle with it to sell against Airbus? And they've got to find a partner. The only other partners out there are Russia and China. And Irkut would be an interesting partner for Embraer to either license and westernize and sell in the West that aircraft, which is well designed. It's modern. It's got all the latest fancy technology, including a composite wing. Does that make sense? So I'll throw out my 2 bombs for the day, and there we go.
Okay, let me just recover from that. I think if I look forward, I would agree with you, the three of you, that there's fascinating things going on in the big end of biz jets, and I think Airbus clearly has a very nice 2022 to look forward to. Game theory tells us that a duopoly is highly unstable and dangerous when one of the players becomes too weak compared to the other. And I remember the former CEO of Airbus saying that this was he was saying this at one of the events that Airbus had, that he was very worried about this, that Boeing's weakness would be dangerous for Airbus. So even though 2022 looks good for Airbus, they have to be very careful because they don't live on an island, and there could be disruption from Boeing. What that disruption will come as, it could be pricing, who knows. So the Boeing situation is a scary thing. It's a scary thing. For me, the 2022 thing that I'm going to be really paying attention to is Embraer. I think they have done remarkably well. If you look at the shock of the deal that was coming and then went away, and then we had COVID, and look at how well they have been doing in the eVTOL space. They are like number one, and they have certified airplanes before. A lot of these other players, they're new to this industry. Have they certified anything? These guys know what they're doing. And another one that strikes me as interesting is de Havilland getting involved with the hydrogen electric hybrids on the Dash 8. I think that's a really interesting thing to watch. Sustainability is the new religion, and you can't question it, because then you're not a good guy. So I think that besides the obvious Boeing Airbus thing, Embraer is fascinating to watch, because they're actually strong in a space where there's a lot of disruption, lots of new names, lots of new ideas, lots of money. Embraer is the credible one there, and they're doing very well. Open discussion.
Yeah. I'll start because I poked into this a little bit, but I looked at how different companies, let's say general aviation, which includes eVTOLs, how their stocks have performed over time. And interestingly, and I'm just doing this from memory, but I believe for the year, General Dynamics has been up like a third or something. That increased to maybe, up 50% for Textron, if I remember. And you get to Embraer, I think their stock is up 100 and something percent. And then finally, Bombardier, which is a pure play, is up over a double for the year 2021. Shift to charter, and I'll get to eVTOL in a minute. But there's not many publicly traded charter companies except Wheels Up, which is maybe a little puffery because their stock for the year is down about half or so. It's a capital intensive industry, and it's not an easy, home run to succeed in that business. But lastly, to eVTOLs, which I include in general aviation because they're designed to, ferry people in urban conditions. But gosh, there's maybe 4 going on 5 SPAC-backed companies out there now, and they're all down 40% for the year. So one would question, from a investment standpoint anyway, the future viability of some of these programs. But to your point, anyone who's in the business already, like an Embraer, I think Textron has some skin in the game, maybe some others, but yeah, they get the certification game. They know how to, have service support, a parts network. It's already built, and they could best execute something like that if there is a future for something like this. So yeah, I agree. Embraer is in a good space to be, should that industry develop.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I'm just extremely skeptical about eVTOL. Addison, I know you like to think you can't question the new religion, but there are plenty of people questioning the new religion. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of prospect, frankly, for hydrogen for widespread adaptation of hydrogen in this business. I'm not sure I get it. I don't think the disruption in this business is going to be technological. I don't think eVTOL or some incredible new sustainability model or anything like that is what does it. I think the thing to look for in the coming years, and I genuinely hope this is something that happens, is that the large mezzanine suppliers, be it GE, be it Raytheon, most of all perhaps, or Safran or whoever, basically enables a new platform. You quite correctly raise the risk or point out the risks of having an unstable duopoly with Boeing sort of teetering on the brink. And you can easily see that getting worse. I really like Ernie's A220-500 rationales, both in terms of reordering the supply chain, getting costs down, and pursuing a promising new product. But most of all, the A220-500 would be aimed square at the heart of pretty much Boeing's last card that it holds, which is the MAX 8. It's the only thing they've got that's sold in significant quantities, that seems to have a really good market position. It's a good aircraft. And the A220-500 could probably beat it. That would be the triggering of that unstable phase in the duopoly. So what happens then? If I were a mezzanine supplier, I'd look to the only airframer that's not quite got the bandwidth, but still a really good airframer, talking about Embraer here, and say, all right, Embraer, time to join the big leagues. We're going to help you. Because, even though we're worried about irritating our airframe customers, we're even more concerned about the prospect of that unstable duopoly. So the idea of a Raytheon or GE or Safran alliance with Embraer to create some kind of new aircraft. I don't know what it looks like, but I think it would be mainline. I think that to me is, in a world of impossibilities, that's the least impossible. I guess I would put it that way.
Isn't it amazing if we look back at the ITC case? I think I could speak, well, certainly speak for myself, but at the time, who would have thought that it would have been all the votes went against Boeing? That was amazing to me. And look where we are today. Embraer and Boeing both had to do some adjustments, but Embraer seems to be climbing out. Boeing, not so much. I don't think we could have thought that would have been the outcome. It's amazing. Karma is real.
Well, the ITC case against Canada, I think we all said it was incredibly ill-advised, a potential self-inflicted wound. We thought it was a foot wound. It turned out to be a leg wound, or perhaps even higher than that. It was a very bad self-inflicted wound, no question there. Your point about karma, Addison, yeah. The karmic payback is obviously being removed from having the FA-18 removed from the Canadian fighter competition. That's bad. Giving A220 wing technology to Airbus and Spirit, the resin transfer and fusion technology, absolutely. A220-500, at the time, I think Boeing people said, we're playing chess here and they're playing checkers or something like that. It turned out that they were playing three-dimensional chess and Boeing was playing some kind of dumbed down tic-tac-toe or something.
Yeah, tiddlywinks.
Tiddlywinks. Yeah, it's just a bizarre outcome.
It's interesting you mentioned the fighter thing in Canada. I read something the other day that was really interesting. That the pushback against the F-18, okay, we all understand that, but don't discount the F-15EX.
Well, it doesn't appear to be in the running. It would have made sense, I think, from the standpoint of Canadian national requirements, but it appears that they've deselected. It's, in theory, at least F-35 versus Gripen, which means F-35.
Well, you could get like 3.5 F-35s or 3 squadrons of Gripens, right?
Yeah, Gripen is the value choice, but the idea of the Royal Canadian Air Force purchasing a lightweight single-engine fighter, given its requirements, that would, a fighter decision is also a foreign policy decision, and the F-35 implies a future of coalition warfighting, strategic alliances, and a global presence. Right. The Gripen it defends your borders. It does a really good job. It's a really good value, but it's an air sovereignty machine. It is not a coalition warfighter.
Right.
So I think given the way Canada is going in the world, they want to be taken seriously for all the right reasons. Probably it's the F-35.
Gentlemen, anything else you want to add in? Looking forward?
just think we're going to see continued turbulence for a little while as the uncertainty of COVID continues. But I think there's enough pent up demand. There are enough people who are basically fed up with the whole process that they've stopped with the vaccinations. They're protesting in the streets in some countries on lockdowns. So I don't think we'll see the same draconian reactions we've had in the past because they're economically unsustainable. And the nature of the pandemic, the question is, how deep will this cut in terms of illness into workforce and other recoveries? And we don't know the answer to that yet. And waiting for, well, in Italian, Fauci means Jaws. So we're waiting for Dr. Jaws to tell us what's going to happen here.
I didn't know that. Takes me back to the great Bond character, but I think that's exactly right. You know, I think when we do a podcast in 2023, if we have the pleasure, I think we're going to start to see this in the rearview mirror. I think it'll be the only really lasting damage to the industry is going to be twin aisle jets, but that'll have been an acceleration of pre-existing trends and conditions. There was already overcapacity in that segment. There was already a substitution effect with single aisles taking a lot more jobs in terms of routes from twin aisle jets. That was pre-existing. It was just magnified and accelerated by the pandemic. I think everything else is going to be, if not recovered, then pretty much most of the way there. So it'll be remembered as a relatively fierce, but relatively short-lived and relatively localized downturn. It'll be remembered as unpleasant, but something we recovered from. I'm still pretty confident about that.
Boy, I hope that works out.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, right, exactly. Gentlemen, it's been super talking to you. Thank you so much. Have a great holiday. And I guess we'll see each other next year. Hopefully soon.
Yes.
Soon next year.
Happy holiday and happy new year too.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
All the best.
Okay.
Stay healthy,
Yeah.
and prosperous.
Will do.